Well, welcome today. It's good to have you for our webinar. We're focused on what's working in large churches right now. And I'm so looking forward to today's conversation because we're hearing from many of you, though some of you are experiencing health and success and growth at this point. Many of you are still trying to figure out what really works in ministry, what works in our mission as the church on this side of the pandemic. And I'm encouraged because today we're excited to have a conversation. We're not just giving you theory. We're actually going to talk with some pastors. Their churches are experiencing health on this side of the pandemic. And with that, I'm going to be joined by Chris Hodges from the Church of the Highlands, Omar Giritli from Christ Fellowship Church in Miami, and Miles McPherson from Rock Church, and they're in Southern California. Today, it's February. We all may wish we were in Southern California. I don't know, but they're going to be talking about what's actually working in their ministries right now, and specifically, we're going to be hitting 4 areas of ministry. We're going to be talking about how to reach new people, how to connect new people to the faith in the church, how to engage people that are already a part of our congregations and help them take their next steps towards Christ. Multisite strategies, because large churches are continuing to use multisite to increase the impact of their ministry. And then the importance of creating a strong culture in our ministry. So that's where the conversation is going to go. But let me introduce my friends here. Miles, it's good to see you again. How is the weather? It's San Diego, right? Is that where you're located?
I am, but we just had about a week or 10 days of rain and floods. But today it's blue sky and about 70 degrees.
Well, it's good. It's good to have you. I'm glad that you survived all that rain. Obviously, we've seen that in the news quite a bit around the country, so I'm glad that you're doing well. Pastor Omar, how are you today?
Doing great. Sunny down here in Miami, 81 degrees, clear skies.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. And Pastor Chris, I know you're a big golfer. It's probably nice in Birmingham, so I'm sorry that I'm taking you away from the golf course today, but it's good to have you with this conversation.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it so much. I represent the rest of the country that's not 70 or 80 degrees. It's cold and cloudy, 50 degrees here in Birmingham. So,
all right, good. Well, and especially representing the rest of the country is Amy Anderson, my friend Amy, who joins us from Minneapolis. Is there snow on the ground today in Minneapolis, Amy?
Tony, I have 3 words for you. Winter storm warning.
Oh, no.
So it's just beautiful here. It's covered in white. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear
I know
that.
You're all jealous, but not everyone can live in Minnesota.
Well, for the rest of you, it's good to have you with us for the webinar today as well. And by the way, we want you to fully participate, and you can do that. You can submit your questions. We're going to try to respond to some questions in real time at the end, but you can do that in the live Q&A as well. Sean from our team at the Unstuck Group will be answering those questions via chat and really helping us identify the questions that we'll be covering at the very end in our live Q&A. And if we can't get to all those questions, we'll continue to follow up with content so that we can try to address as many of your questions as we can. And if you want, you can participate in social media. Just use hashtag UnstuckChurch for today's conversation. Well, as I mentioned, we're going to hit 4 themes during our conversation today. And the first is all about reach. And what we're seeing from large churches that are experiencing health and growth in this season is they're very intentional about widening the front door and inviting people to follow Jesus. And so let's pick up the conversation there. Amy, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Miles, this first question's for you. We're hearing at the Unstuck Group from several large churches that there's a lot of brand new people in the church over the last few years. And just curious, have you experienced that at Rock Church as well? And if yes, what's driving that?
Yeah, we always have a lot of visitors generally, but I think over the last few years, everybody knows the world is kind of turned upside down. A lot of people looking for hope. And a lot of people who normally wouldn't go to church are seeking church. And I think churches that are reaping a lot of those new people are reaping it because of what they sowed before. And as far as reputation, for a lot of people who went through COVID and the uncertainty of the last couple of years, are thinking, what church comes to mind? And it may only be a church they heard about in the news or in the media because they don't have any Christian friends. And so I think that one of the reasons that we and other churches might be reaping that is because what we've sown before as far as reputation and what people heard about you serving the community. And in addition, during COVID, when we were, as all churches were serving, that was another introduction to the church and what the church can do for them. People who weren't food insecure are all of a sudden food insecure, and that's a big deal. People are homeless that weren't homeless, and so people have a real need to cry out to God, and a lot of times the first touch is through serving them.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And it's an encouragement to just hear. I know the churches that were intentional, not just about trying to stick together as a congregation, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, but using this as an opportunity to serve the community, to love on people in the community. I think those churches are really starting to see the fruit of that now at this point. Omar, I'm curious, for years, I know your weekend services at Christ Fellowship have been a key part of your reach strategy, trying to reach new people. Is your weekend service still a part of that strategy? And if so, if not, how is your reach strategy changing? How are you engaging and trying to reach out to people in this season differently?
Yeah, well, our church for a long time, and we've always been very outwardly focused. Like many churches are. We've always challenged our people to have as many gospel conversations with people as possible. We've really utilized, the invite card, the invest and invite card that, so many of our churches have, but I think, I think what was very beneficial, as kind of Miles was alluding to, is that because we've been so outwardly focused, so many people in our community know who we are. So many people have had invite cards, from years and years, and that type of awareness. I think when the hard moments came and they're looking for a place, it's almost like, oh yeah, I've heard of that church. Oh, I know somebody that goes there. I know there's a lot of people there's a lot of different areas. And so that has really helped in really people coming in and hearing the hope that we have in Christ. And so that's been very beneficial. Like many of our churches, we're missional focus especially during the pandemic when we were not able to meet for a little bit, and even right now, we have a nonprofit called Care for Miami, which is an initiative of Christ Fellowship, where we have literally we have a mobile dental bus that goes to all these different under-resourced and hurting places and provides free dental work. We partner with the Cancer Institute to provide free services to people who can't get services. So we partner with them. We just actually are about to launch a brand new mobile grocery market that will literally go to all these under-resourced neighborhoods, and literally people could go in there and shop, maintaining their dignity, what they want, free of charge. And so people really got behind it. They gave very generously during the Christmas campaign to make it happen, and it's coming a reality. So we've been very focused on just really identifying the needs of the community and just going out and meeting those needs. So I think a combination of strong community awareness for many years, and then also being a church that really is just trying to be as much in the community as possible. All that works together to draw people in.
Yeah, Omar, what I hear is, you're too young to remember these days, but back when I got started in ministry on Sunday mornings, churches would get people to come to church based on what was happening on Sunday morning. And I think what I hear from you is people are coming to church based on what happens Monday through Saturday. So based on the impact, not only that the ministry is having, but the relational connections that people in your congregation have in the community, how they're loving people in the community, that's what's bringing people to church in this season.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Pastor Chris, the weekend service tends to be a big front door where people come and try faith and try on who God is. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are other ways that your church is reaching new people and helping them take those steps towards faith or towards church?
Yeah, all the same things that Miles and Omar said. We do the same things to make sure that we're serving first. You add value to people first, and then they come, looking for answers after you've, done something for them. I still believe that the weekend experience needs to be focused on, not exclusively, but man, I think I would encourage pastors really to take that whole experience up to a very strong level, because there's a new hunger out there from people, verified by some of the latest Barna research, that 74% of all Americans are wanting to grow spiritually. I mean, we haven't had a stat like that in decades, where there is this new hunger for God, and I think they get it not only through biblical teaching, which I think is very, very important, but also through worship experiences, where they know the presence of God is real. And what I'm noticing, and I have this from immediate feedback from how people are attending our church, is that, the more I lean into the Word of God, what it says, even as it relates to culture and not being afraid to speak openly and truthfully, and, of course, do it in love. But man, you don't have to follow the patterns and the culture of the world. People are looking for real answers. And then on top of that, one of our major focuses that we saw tremendous fruit from just this past year was, I kind of inherently knew, and then I did some research with some of our parents, that our young people probably suffered the most through the pandemic. The isolation, not going to school as much, all of that. And I think one of the greatest concerns for families right now, may be one of the greatest, and I say this I want to say this the right way. It's not a church growth strategy, but if you want to grow your church, take care of families right now. Help parents with their children and their students. And so we actually spent about 6 months doing research on ourselves on how effective our youth ministry was, made major changes to meet the current needs of our children and our students. And then I did an entire message on it. I called it Fighting for a Generation, out of Nehemiah 4. And not only preached it, but then gave the plan that we had, to the things that we were going to implement to do better at taking care of their students. We saw 30% growth overnight, and had parents coming back saying, look, we've been watching online. We're going to be in person now. We want to be here, because we know our students don't just need, 3 songs and a sermon. They need a hug in the hallway. They need a friend. They need a mentor. They need relationships. And so we focused on all those things. So I honestly believe one of the best things we can do right now to reach people is to lean into the needs of children and students.
Yeah. Chris, could you share an example of one of the shifts that you made as far as your strategy in kids or students ministry?
Well, we have always done this with kids, and we just emphasized it, but we've had graded curriculum, meaning that each Sunday is not just the latest, whatever the teacher wanted to talk about to bless the kids. No. If you give us 6 years, if your child comes to children's church for 6 years, they'll know the Bible.
Yeah.
Like it's a graded curriculum every year, building on another year. And so, but it requires consistency. It requires being there every week if you want them to really know the Bible. Well, a lot of our parents didn't even know that. And then on the student side, we had more focused on the big gatherings, and we still have a monthly big gathering, a big youth service. But what the parents were saying is, I miss the youth group I grew up in, where we sat on a living room floor, at someone's home with guitar, studying our Bible, singing songs. And so we kind of more instituted more of an organic, old school youth group feel, among our 24 locations, where they have a youth pastor. And honestly, we had some of our locations that didn't have student pastors. And so we needed to hire about 9 more youth pastors across our campuses. And we just said, look, this is important to you. It's important to us. We're going to make this work. And we're, youth pastors who can go to graduations and take Six Flags trips and things like that. And immediately their response was, that's our need. Our kids are lonely. Our kids need someone to know their name, someone to give them a call when they're down. And so, and again, we saw immediate growth out of that.
That's fantastic. Miles, we've been talking about what we're doing in person in our churches. We've been talking about what our ministries are doing in our communities. my question for you is, what role do you think digital or online strategies should or shouldn't play when it comes to our reach strategies, how we're reaching new people?
Well, obviously, we have to understand how it works, and I'm still trying to figure out, engage views and all this different technology and how much is real. But how we can leverage all the different platforms to reach as many people, at the same time, not encourage people that replaces being in person. How do we get them in person?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we leverage it to hook them, show them what you're doing, feed them, to be with people? It does not replace that. I think a lot of Christians have, when you learn how to ride your bicycle, and then one day you're riding with one hand, and then one day you're riding with no hands. You're like, look, Mom, I can ride with no hands. I think a lot of Christians have gotten to the point where, look, I can walk with God without going to church. And I think that's a very dangerous place. So I think when we leverage online and we say it's going to be online, that we caveat it by saying, don't let this replace being in person. And I think it's great for marketing. I think it's great for getting the word out. And I think it's great for, our campuses, but there's people there to be with them. And so I think balancing those two things is the balance, and not letting our people off the hook to say, hey, you need to come here, you need to serve, you need to give, you need to be accountable, you need to have people look you in the eye, and even in doing small groups, in person. So I think there's a balance between the two. And let me say this, also leveraging it not only for the church, but leveraging it obviously to get out way past the church, and take advantage of all the platforms and the secular people who have platforms that you can be on to get the word out.
I love that. All right. Well, that was the first theme, which was around reaching new people for Jesus, reaching people to connect them to our churches. But once they're connected to the churches, our focus shifts more about how do we get them engaged? How do we help them take their next steps towards Christ? And what we're hearing from large churches as far as what's working in this season is they're, again, very intentional about encouraging people to take next steps, to connect with others beyond Sunday morning services. And so let's dive in some questions here. Amy, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think, Omar, I'd like to ask this. One of the things that we hear all the time, and I think most churches, large churches, small churches, I think everyone agrees that people seem to be attending church just less frequently. And because of that, I know many large churches are focused on what are the other ways that we can keep people engaged with our church, right? So I'm just curious, at Christ Fellowship, what are the ways that you do that to keep people engaged?
Well, I agree 100%. I think what I've noticed that people who used to come every week come every other week. The people who used to come every other week come once a month now. The people who come once a month, the stars have to align for them to come back to attend church. So I think we're all facing that. I think we've entered into a new season of church ministry. I think we've all come to terms with that, and we're okay with that when we move forward. One of the things that what Tony was just saying about the crucial next steps. This past fall, we did a series, which I kind of I stole from Tony. I actually called it Unstuck. It's called Unstuck. And what I called it Unstuck, the reason I called it Unstuck was this, is because what I'm sensing after COVID, many people felt like they were stuck in their spiritual life. They just felt kind of stuck. They just felt they're not moving forward. So I did a series about how to get unstuck in your spiritual life post-COVID. Like, how can you move forward and re-engage to what your walk with Christ used to be for? It was a 4-week series, really, where it was just our discipleship process, which for us is connect to God, others, ministry, and the mission. And every week, I challenge people really strongly. Like the first week was, connect to God, which for us is personal relationship, but corporate worship. Connect to God, come to a worship service. And I challenge them hard. I mean, at the end, I challenged about the importance of corporate worship, coming together, kind of what Miles was saying, physical. There's an aspect of physical that you can't replicate. I made the men stand up at the end. I challenged them, all the men in the congregation, that you are the leaders of the home. You need to lead by example. And the next week we had like 30% increase, just over. Like people were like very convicted about it. The second week it was about small groups. I did a strong sermon about small groups. Like we had like almost 1,000 people sign up for small groups. The third week was about serving in a ministry, challenge them with serving. You got served. You use the gifts that God's given to you. A bunch of people. So I literally went after them and I challenged them, in the most loving, strong way. And we gave like clear next steps. And it was, and it's been really working. It's been really working to do that. Another thing that we've done, so every time we do anything, it's a very clear step, next step, very clear. Another thing that we've instituted that has really just been special is that, we are a church before COVID, we were big in come forward invitations. So after the service, hey, I'm going to be right in the front, worship, I would love to meet you, come, I would love to celebrate with you. And COVID, we had to stop that. The whole, because people didn't want to move on and it was just a different season. I said, we got to get back to that. So I started doing that. And every time it's like 50 people come up. And I'm telling you, when people come up, that is so powerful for the congregation to see it. They walk off feeling like God is at work, and there's times that some people don't come up, and it's fine. That's some certain services, early ones or whatever, but it's fun, It's a chance for people to see, wow, like God works in different ways at different times. But I'm telling you, when we do come forward invitations, like, because we were doing the raise your hand and all that stuff, and that was fine. Man, those come forward invitations are just so powerful. So we started doing that, as a next step for your salvation. Come to the front. We'd love to meet you, and it's been very good. So those have been things that have been very, clear next steps, very intentional, very challenging.
Yeah, I love the clarity and the weight that you're putting on bringing clarity to next steps, because I think we often think we're clear on what we're asking people to do, but it can get so missed. And so I love the emphasis, Omar, that you brought forward with, here's clearly what you need to do next to get your spiritual life more engaged.
Yeah, and speaking of clarity around next steps, Pastor Chris, I actually think engagement and next steps it's an area of ministry that Church of the Highlands is really known for. And so for those that may not be familiar with your strategy, can you unpack the growth track a little bit and how you're pointing people to engage with your dream team?
Yeah, and the growth track is just one aspect of it. Omar and Amy are exactly right. The key to getting people to take next steps and engaging them is clarity. So most people don't do it just because they don't know it's there. And we, again, as Amy said, we think it's clear, but it's not. And a lot of different strategies will work, honestly. And I always say, people say, what is the right way to do it? I say the way that works. If it's producing the results, that's the one you need to do. And if it's not, don't be afraid to tweak it or make sure you're making it clear. And I think that's what we have done well at Highlands, is that we make the spiritual journey clear, that you can be in a relationship with God. You need to deal with the issues of your past. You need to find your redemptive calling. You have a spiritual gift, and then you need to get out there and do something. So I think that personally is the Great Commission. It can be said a lot of different ways. Evangelism, pastoral care, discipleship, sending. I've heard it 1,000 different ways, right? So we came up with language. Speaking of clarity, the key to it is creating language that they can understand. Because language creates culture and language creates clarity. So we came up with the phrases, know God, find freedom, discover your purpose, make a difference. And it kind of rings now. It's on T-shirts, mugs, walls, videos. It's everywhere to create the clarity. Right in the middle of that, you asked specifically about our third step. And that is, once a person finds Jesus and then it starts working through their issues, and we do that in groups, the growth track now turns the corner from your past to your future. And we came up with a 3-step process where a person can discover their spiritual gift, or I like to call it their redemptive calling. To redeem something means to put it back to what it was supposed to be doing. So we all find ourselves in some place in our life, but that's not what we were supposed to be. But redemption means God's going to put us back to our original intent. And so to do that, you have to know what that is. And that's why I love my job, Tony, is because they have to come to God to find it. Because all the days ordained for you are written in his book before any of them ever came to be. So I always tell them, hey, go try to find it in your career or your hobbies or your sports. You'll be back, because only God has your future in his hands. I mean, you're going to have to get it from him. And that's why I love my job. So the growth track is actually designed to help a person connect to a local church. It's the first step of our membership class, but also find their personality, their spiritual gift, because your design reveals your destiny. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And King David said, and my soul knows this full well. Most people do not know it. As Mark Twain says, the two greatest days of your life are the day you were born, then the day you discovered why you were born. And so if you can give people that gift of here's why you're on the planet, here's what you were created to do, and then point them in a direction to a way to live it out, that's the dream team. So the growth track actually helps them discover it. The dream team helps them live it out. So they're serving. And it gets us to this wonderful place that is the touchdown line, if you ask me, of church. And that is, people say the local church is the hope of the world. No, it's not. The local church mobilized is the hope of the world. If we get everybody doing what they were called to do, it really is. It's what we're trying to accomplish after they find God, find freedom. Now they're finding their purpose, and now they're out there doing something that makes a difference. And one last comment. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give a person, because their problems aren't going anywhere. So you can try to solve them, and you will, but another one will pop up. So the real solution to your problems isn't solving your problems. It's having something greater than your problems in your life. So it supersedes your problems. Paul said, I'm hard pressed on every side, but I'm not in distress. Well, why, Paul? Because I have my eyes fixed not on all these things, but on something else that's greater. And if we can get our people's eyes fixed on something that's bigger than them, it actually is probably one of the greatest ways to pastor people.
Miles, I actually want to go back to where you opened up at the beginning of this webinar, talking about your presence in the community and the way you serve your community. I think you call them outreach ministries at Rock Church. I'm curious to get your take on this. And, are those ministries more about the people you serve or the people who are doing the serving?
Well, first, let me say I was hesitant to get on this call because of Chris was on it, because he has all the answers.
I know, he's quite inspiring.
Just take what he said, write it down, and then call it a wrap.
Right.
We call it a Do Something Church, and I actually wrote a book on Do Something. And in 1 Corinthians 3:4, God comforts us with. We need to go comfort others with the comfort we've been comforted by. Actually, 5 times comforted in 2 verses. And so when God redeems me, calls me, cleanses me, comforts me, I need not to just rub myself with comfort lotion and feel good and that's it. I need to now go back to where I came and go pull somebody out from where I was, from where I came. There was a guy who healed a dog. He found a dog. The dog wouldn't chase the stick. He had one glass eye. He had a broke leg, had patches of hair all out of his body. And the guy gave him a glass eye, fixed his leg, taught him how to chase a stick, gave him some Rogaine, grew his hair back, and the dog was healthy. And then about a week later, the dog ran away. And he couldn't figure out why the dog would run away. He just gave new life. And then about a week later, he heard the dog scratching on the door, and he had another mangy dog with him. And so really for us to receive Christ, to be healed, redeemed, delivered from whatever you were in bondage to, we need to go back and deliver and be part of deliverance to somebody else. So it's about the person ministering and realizing this is why I came. One of the things Chris was talking about is having something bigger. And if you want to get rid of a problem, get a bigger problem. And sometimes that bigger problem is somebody else's problem, and to get your eyes off yourself. And so serving the community is about you, and it's about them, because God is a very efficient God. He gets 2 for 1 all the time. And our philosophy is count, walk, ask, love. Our Do Something Church philosophy: count, walk, ask, love. And count is take a numerical assessment of the pain in the community. How many homeless, how many strip clubs, how many convalescent homes? It's all about a number. You can't measure anything without a number. And then walk is go to them. Jesus walked everywhere. He not only did he not have a car, but he was in the tombs. He was at the Pharisee's house. Ask instead of tell. How can I help you? Mm-hmm. You can do this. When I teach this, I tell people you can do this before you leave the room. You could ask somebody, how can I help you? We went to the mayor and said, look, we want to give you 100,000 hours of volunteer service. How would you like to use them?
Mm.
And he said, how are you going to do that? And at the time, we had never done it. So I said, I don't know, but we'll figure it out. And then you love. You don't do what people say. You actually love them, because some people might say, give me some money so I can buy drugs. Well, you're not going to give them the money, but you can love them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can think that way of going outward as a church, it's going to bless the people, because it's better to give than receive. It's going to bless the people who are receiving. God's going to be glorified, and it's a win-win-win.
You know what I love the most about what you just said? Well, it was also good, Miles, but I love your concept of 2 for 1 within outreach ministries, because I think there's a lot of good things that we can do in our community. But if it's just a push out and there's not that 2 for 1 where there is, where God's glorified through it and a draw back towards the church, I think sometimes we can miss. So I love the 2 for 1 mindset. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
That's so good. Every one of these topics, we could just spend an hour on each of them alone. But for the sake of time, I do want to move forward. So the third theme that we're hearing from large churches is related to multi-site. And what we're hearing is specifically this. Large churches are leveraging multi-site strategy as a reaction to health and growth in their ministry. And that's actually enabling more growth than it's allowing them to reach and help more people say yes to following Jesus. And so let's talk a little bit about multi-site here.
Yeah, maybe Pastor Chris, I can toss this one to you first. But, I think many pastors were really interested in seeing how this pandemic would or wouldn't affect multi-site strategy in large churches. There were lots of opinions out there. I'm just curious, how has it affected your multi-site strategy at Church of the Highlands?
Yeah, we're still on the same trajectory we were before. So we're not expanding like we did in the early years, simply because all the places that we've always wanted to go, we have. So we only have a couple of 2 or 3 other places, because we want to stay within a drivable distance for our staff to physically come to be a part of our staff meetings and things like that. And of course, we plant churches outside of that, autonomous churches. And so I don't want to compete with that organization either. So I'm not trying to have Church of the Highlands locations across all of America. They are within a very defined circle around our home base, which is in Birmingham. But I think one of the things that's not known well about multi-site is that some churches try to have multi-site to grow their church. And really it is something that should be done because your church is growing. And I'm not trying to liken it to business, because God and church is not a business, but it is a franchise type model, meaning, you kind of, if you had a restaurant, it needs to be good food at that first location before you multiply that restaurant in other locations, and where the demand is so high. And that's probably one of the healthier ways to think about multi-site. Now, we certainly have gone into locations just because, or cities, not out of trying to hive off from other locations in our area, but to go into new territory. That still is the case. But I think one of the biggest misnomers that I hear from the pastors that I mentor and coach is that they think it is a growth strategy. And so that's where I say, no, why don't you retreat back? Let's get home base solid, strong. Let's kind of get it to a standing room only kind of experience. And then we can branch out into other locations.
Is your heart smiling, Tony?
That's so helpful. It is.
Yeah,
it really is.
That a lot.
And by the way, Pastor Chris, my offer still stands. When you're ready to open a location in Orange Beach, I will come be your campus pastor. Okay. So
I want to be your associate pastor at that location.
Miles, we actually, and it was surprising to me when we recently surveyed large churches. So this is churches over 1,000 people. We found that 2/3 of those large churches are now multi-site. And I knew large churches were leaning into multi-site to expand their mission impact, but I was surprised that number was so high. And so I just want to hear from you, when you look back at the history of the Rock Church, how has multi-site strategy played into your success? Has it contributed to that? Why or why not?
Yeah, and you have to define success, because I think what Chris said is, if you're doing it to grow, or because to grow, maybe not. That's not the reason. One of the reasons we started out first multi-site and then continues to expand is because of our do something culture. So we had a campus where 30% were coming from, 15 minutes away. How can we best serve that community, that mayor, that police chief, that school district? Well, it's not going to be from people that don't live there. So we planned it not only because we had people in our main campus, but we wanted to people in their community to be able to be there and go to church there and serve that community. And so we go back to do something, culture, count, walk, ask, love. Who's your mayor? Who's your police chief? Who's the school superintendent in that area? How do you serve, is there a foster home there, convalescent homes? How do you serve that community? So and we told our church, we're not doing this so you don't have to drive. We're doing this so you can bring people and serve your area. So just think of it as a base of operation, or, an aircraft carrier goes out to the ocean, and that's from which the planes take off. This church needs to be to that community.
That's good.
Pastor Omar, you have the unique challenge of being both multi-site and multicultural, with locations in Miami, the Caribbean, Latin America. What role, if any, do you think multi-site has when it comes to reaching and engaging people from a variety of racial and ethnic backgrounds?
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with 100% with what Pastor Chris was saying. Another way you can say it is that multi-site is not a church growth model; it's a community reaching model, which is kind of what Miles was alluding to. So as well. So for us, Miami, which I'm sure may be like some cities, but we're very multicultural. And what's interesting is almost like every campus that we have, it's very unique. It has a different demographic. Even, Miami is very Hispanic, but even there's different types of Hispanic. Once you get into Hispanic culture, it's not just like, oh, there's just Hispanic people. They just got different vibes, different flair, different interests, different. So we have one campus out in the Redland, which is like the farming community, like good old boys from back in the day from here in Florida. You have one in like really dense Hispanic community in Doral. We have a downtown campus in the middle next to the Miami World Center now. That's like very like, forward thinking, the whole deal, so we got many different ones. And even in South America, we have country, campuses in Colombia, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Cuba, all these different, which all have very different ones. So, it's been very effective for us, the way we try to do and teach God's word. It's like Chris said, they're hungry for biblical teaching. Especially Hispanic people, they love like challenging teaching. Like, hey, don't sugarcoat it. Tell me what God's word says and challenge me on it. Don't hit me with it. Tell me, in a loving way. They love it. But we just try to make it as practical as well as possible so that people could apply in their each culture. So that's one of the benefits of multi-site for us. We've been able to reach Miami and all these different communities. That I think normally, we don't. And if we find there's a specific community that we feel like we just really don't, it's hard for us to kind of like really ingrain ourselves in, and then we just, we try to plant a church in that community, but that's the beauty of multi-site. Multi-site, you can establish a church in any community to serve different types of people in each place,
All right, some great thoughts around multi-site strategy, but I wanted to wrap up our conversation today talking about healthy culture and this goes back well before COVID and the pandemic, but certainly it's a key to the health we're seeing in large churches today. They are very focused on shaping a strong culture on their team, and then that's leading to a healthy, strong culture in the church as a whole. So let's spend a few moments wrapping up our conversation today talking about what does healthy culture look like in our churches?
Yeah. And so Pastor Miles, maybe can you give us a glimpse into the culture at the Rock Church? I mean, how have you established that culture over time?
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects of culture, internal and external expression of it. And I think part of the healthy part of our culture is a culture to do something in the community, a culture to serve, a culture to share your faith. We're having evangelism training this week. We have 20% of our churches signed up to come learn about sharing their faith better. And so people who are quick to want to serve other people and give of themselves to other people and the community is a sign of health that I'm really excited about and always want to see, versus having a church that's saying, give me. I want to give. And so that's part of, and also we're going to work on a culture of honor. And that's something we're going to be working on this year, in addition to service, honoring one another, honoring the Lord, and honoring the gifts that people have given, the gifts that everyone has, and really helping people identify and ensure that they're in the right spot for themselves, doing what God has created them to do.
Omar, you had the unique challenge of becoming the senior pastor. It was a healthy leadership transition, but you became the senior pastor right at the beginning of COVID, I think it was, right? So as the new senior pastor, I mean, the good thing is you were able to inherit a healthy culture. And I'm here we are a couple of years into your leadership. I want to hear, what part of that culture are you trying to reinforce? And then maybe how are you trying to put your own fingerprints on the culture?
So what I would just say regarding our staff, for several years now, we've been doing. I'm gonna first talk about our staff, and then I'll talk about our church. For our staff, we partner with the Best Christian Workplace Institute, which they do they do what do you call it?
A survey?
Like a survey, like a survey of our staff in different areas, and anonymous, and we thought we were super healthy, and actually we're at a critical point, and so we were from all these every year we went from a critical point to a healthy church to now flourishing, and it's for 2 years now we're flourishing. We were almost at a toxic, critical point, almost like, and that we were able within our staff to address the things that they were concerned, and we've it's been very healthy for us. No one likes to look at the mirror, but it's healthy for us to adjust, to be able to adjust. So our staff has really taken steps. I want to encourage anybody watching that to use those, because we as pastors and leaders need to know the reality of our staff and how they're feeling, because sometimes they won't tell you unless you make those avenues possible. Then in regards to our church, one of the things, that I guess has really strengthened the culture of our church and almost like put my fingerprint is that earlier last year, like right after Easter, actually, we did a series called The Conversationalist. And what it was a series where we tackled all these hard topics in society. I'm talking about abortion, addiction, homosexuality, transgender, all of these things that we all know are in culture. And so what I did, I preached for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then I would sit down with somebody in that field who struggled with it, whatever the case may be, and had a conversation with it. And I cannot tell you how much good feedback we got from that series. Because when we planned it, we didn't realize it was going to take place, but it landed right at the juncture where the Supreme Court thing with the Roe versus Wade and all that stuff, was culminating at that juncture. And our people were so appreciative that we as a church were very clear where we stood, and we spoke with compassion, but unapologetically of what God's word says. And I think that really just solidified people's commitment to our church, because they felt like, wow, this church, they're going to preach God's truth even when it's not popular and even when it's a very sensitive topic in society. And I don't know how we got through that series. We hit some really hard topics, but man, was it very healthy for the culture of at least of our church, because they knew from that moment on, Christ Fellowship was not going to shy away, and we were going to stand on God's truth. And honestly, it was just like a big boost for church commitment and the morale. And I got the excitement. People were very excited to dive into God's word and find out. So to me, I feel those were two critical things we did last year. The staff addressed all their issues, helped them, and then also that series was pivotal for our church.
Well, Pastor Chris, maybe you can bring this home for us. From the outside looking in, Church of the Highlands appears to have a strong, healthy culture. What role does leadership development have in establishing that strong culture? And specifically, what does that look like at Highlands?
It's a great question because as I was hearing these guys talk, they're exactly right. You know, the establishing healthy culture is just so important. And but one of my probably one of the best leadership lessons I ever learned in my life was on culture, and here it is. And that is, you can't create one; you can only be one. So you can't just say, "Well, I want this." You have to be it to get it. And I'll give you an example. We have a very inviting culture, but I never tell our people to invite. I tell them the stories of the people I'm inviting. So you really can't say, look, I need you guys to bring your friends. You do better just to tell them other friends you're bringing, you know, in these conversations. So you can't ask for a worshiping church if you're not a worshiper. You can't ask for a praying church if you're not a prayer. So you asked the question specifically about what role leadership plays. It all begins with us. You know, if I want a friendly culture then I need to get out there and shake some hands and not be locked up in a green room. You know, whatever it might be. And so I always ask a pastor, what do you want? Now let's just focus on you becoming that in that. And then once again, anything you really desire, you'll have to clarify and define. And like all great churches like these guys have, we've defined the culture that we want. And we have a code, if you will. I have probably 20 different cultural values and codes that we have for our team. And they're fantastic. I'll give you an example for one. One, for example, is we pass negatives up and positives down. So it's okay not to like something, but make sure you send it in the right direction. You know, go to somebody who can do something about it. Anything laterally or down is gossip. Okay. So that's an example of having a code or values. But we have general ones that I'll leave everybody that's watching today with that has really served us well. And that we do ask this of every person who steps on our volunteer teams. And that is, we want you to love God. In other words, be passionately in love with God. It doesn't matter how good you park a car or take care of a kid in the nursery. If you don't love God, I need you to love God. I need you to love people and value them and write notes and shake hands and high five and just really value people. If you do it with excellence. That's the third one. We're going to do things well. We call it pursuing excellence. That we'd rather do fewer things extremely well than do a lot of things not well. And then finally, attitude. You got to have a great attitude. We choose joy. We don't feel joy. We make the choice to live out and express a joyful attitude. And one of the greatest church growth principles I've ever learned in the whole world is found in Psalm 100, serve the Lord with gladness. You know, if we show up and we're the happiest people they've seen all week, trust me, they're going to come back.
Well, it's been a joy for me to engage this conversation with all of you. So encouraging. It's just, we have to praise God for the great work that he's doing through your ministries and the many lives that are being impacted. We're going to transition in a moment to take some live questions. The Unstuck team will be helping to address some of your questions. But before we do that, Pastor Chris, Omar, Miles, thank you for joining us for today's conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Want to equip and disciple your people beyond Sunday? Welcome to Right Now Media, the largest library of video-driven Bible study resources used by more than 20,000 churches, schools, and organizations. With a Right Now Media subscription, everyone in your church can access thousands of biblical resources for kids, couples, small groups, and more. Give your members access to great content anytime, anywhere, on any device. Equip and inspire everyone in your church every day of the week with Right Now Media.
All right, we're going to move into our live Q&A. Tony, Amy, that was a really, really great discussion with those three guys. Fantastic.
Don't you just want to hang out with those three guys all the time? My goodness.
I kind of want to apologize that we're the follow-up here.
I know. I'd like to hang out though where Miles lives though. If we're going to hang out, let's go to San Diego.
Yes.
So a lot of great questions came through during the webinar, and I want to get right to it because we've got a lot of them and only about 11 minutes left to get to them. Okay. Right. First one, Tony, let's start with you. And then Amy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. James asked this question. Many of the ideas that the guys shared were helpful for attracting people with some church background already. James's church is really looking to attract people with no church history whatsoever. Any ideas around that?
That's a great question. And, it really gets to the core of what we love to help churches think about is not only how do we help believers take their next steps towards Christ, but how do we get a sense of who it is in our mission field that we're hoping to reach? And then how do we engage people that are not yet a part of the church and not yet a part of the faith? And that's where designing an intentional reach strategy comes into play. And I love it when we get to help churches think about what does that reach strategy need to look like for your mission field, because it's going to look a little bit different from church to church, because the mission field is going to look a little bit different from community to community. I will say some of the common strategies that I'm seeing churches use to effectively reach people that are outside the church and outside the faith now, they kind of revolve around these four aspects. One, making sure that we're just equipping people in our church, those that already love Jesus, to be on mission in their world, wherever they live, work, and play. And so that's really about creating some intentionality around a relational evangelism strategy for the people in your church. Secondly, churches still are seeing a lot of new people showing up every Sunday, at least the churches that are kind of designing their Sunday experience with new people in mind. And so I do think there are some things that we can be doing really from the parking lot to the kids' ministry spaces, to how we greet people, how we welcome people, and then the service itself, where it really, a lot of it just comes down to language, just making sure that we're using language that reflects the fact that we're expecting guests to show up. But then certainly even in how we express ourselves in worship and the teaching that happens, just making sure that we're sensitive to the fact that there very well may be people joining us for our services on Sunday morning that don't yet have faith in Christ. And boy, if we do that, it would just be reflecting on what Paul taught us back in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 about just being sensitive to the fact that when we gather as the church, there will both be believers and unbelievers with us. So weekend services. The third is, and it really reflects a lot of what Miles was talking about in this conversation, that churches that are reaching people outside the church and outside the faith are actually trying to serve people in the community, people that don't yet come to the church. And just, again, that's going to look a little bit different for every church based on the needs of people in your community, but making sure as a ministry that you're intentionally focused on trying to serve people's needs outside the walls of the church. And then lastly, it really does come down to, we live in a world that leans heavily on digital strategies, content that we're seeing online, video, podcasts. And so the churches that have a wide front door right now are very intentional about how they're leveraging that digital strategy to reach people outside the church and outside the faith. And so again, Sean, it's going to look, that reach strategy is going to look a little bit different for every church. But those are some of the four kind of core aspects of that strategy that we love to help churches identify so that they can continue to engage people, new people that maybe are not yet Christ followers, but will be someday.
Yeah, excellent. That's super helpful. Amy, anything that you would add to that?
Well, just based on my experience, at our church, we would proclaim the weekend service is our main strategy to reach new people. So it was truly a partnership, Tony, as you were talking about, between our church body and those of us who brought the weekend service together. And part of the secret to success there, I think, is having a weekend service that all the things that you said, but it needs to be like predictably reliable, that it's always safe to invite someone. Because the people in your world, you might invite them to church, but they may not come this weekend, but they may come some other weekend. And the more reliable your weekend is, the more apt people are to throw out those invitations, that they trust you, that when my friend shows up, that we aren't going to do anything weird, that it's going to feel comfortable, it's going to speak to their needs. The second thing I would also say, a little bit of a marketing background here, tying into what Miles was talking about in serving the community, is that people typically need 7 positive exposures. Number one, before they remember, your organization. So in this case, your church, but positive exposures before they consider actually trying it out, like trying to come and seeing what it's all about. And so I like that, again, that partnership between what's happening inside the church for what we're doing outside the church to build those relationships with the community, because I think it was Chris who said, problems don't go away. Problems are not going to go away in people's lives. And so it's just, it's really on us to be ready for them when they come.
Yeah, that's good. Amy, I want to toss this back your way, and this is kind of the other side of this, the reach strategy and discipleship. Ralph asked a good question, and I was just going to paraphrase it here. What are large churches seeing as far as successful, practical discipleship strategies for people who are a part of their church and connected to their church right now?
Yeah, if you're an Unstuck listener, you hear us talk about it a lot, but we always coach churches to have, number one, clarity, going back to what we talked about earlier in the webinar, having clarity about what are the next steps that we want people to take, and not having a buffet of options that we have to announce every weekend in whatever room it is with, whatever the curriculum is, rather to have these steps clearly identified at the church. And then from the pulpit, from the platform at the church, telling stories about whether it's small groups or serving opportunities, helping people just get a feel for what those next steps are. And again, related to culture, you live it. You can't tell people what to do. By telling those stories, hopefully that's a compelling reason for people to try on a small group, to try on a serving opportunity, and to disciple other people. I don't know, Tony, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is to be cautious about encouraging people to step into another large group gathering rather than encouraging people to step into a serving opportunity or some sort of smaller group type of environment, because it's in the smaller groups that we have the freedom to ask questions, to really get to know each other, to be able to encourage each other, to get to challenge each other. And if our model for discipleship is you go from a large group gathering on Sunday morning to a large group gathering midweek sometime, it really doesn't create the opportunity then for that type of relational connection. And that's what we're trying to do, is encourage people to not only develop relational connection, but then it's in that we're able to discover maybe what God specifically has for me as I'm taking my next steps toward Christ.
And if I could just add, the question was based on what our large church is doing. The healthiest large churches that at least I see are the ones that have that simple path with those simple steps. But one of the things that we find missing frequently when we're working, even with large churches, is how does that reach strategy come from our personal discipleship process? And of course, we've talked about Bless a lot by Dave Ferguson, but how do we actually compel people to take ownership of their own mission fields? That's a huge piece in discipling other people, is for people to understand, I'm not just here to learn more about Jesus, but I'm here to actually then live that out in the mission field that God's given us.
Yeah, that's a great thought. We just have time for one more question, but Tony, I wanted to get this one in before we were done for today. There's a lot of discussion around the country about revival taking place in universities and churches. It does seem that people are hungry for something fresh and new and are open to a move of God, not just churched people. Are you seeing a trend of this in any of the churches that we're working with?
Yeah, well, it all kind of goes back to how you define revival, doesn't it? And I love the fact that we're seeing examples of this across the country, where the people of God are coming together for teaching and worship and encouraging each other and prayer. I mean, all of that, it's a good thing. It's a good thing when the church does that. But I will tell you, I'm seeing some specific examples of revival in churches where it's not just the body of Christ that's coming together, where we're actually seeing many, many people cross the line of faith. And so new people are becoming Jesus followers. And I mentioned to some of my friends yesterday, Sun Valley Community Church in Phoenix. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people crossing the line of faith, being baptized, going public with their faith, and then beginning to take steps not only toward the church, but take steps in their faith journey. That's the revival that I'm continuing to pray for. So I love it that believers are coming together, But I also continue to pray for more and more people to say yes to following Jesus and making Jesus the center of their lives. And when we continue to see that happening in church after church after church, that's when I will have a better sense that revival is really establishing itself in the church today.
Absolutely. It's very good. Well, that's all the time we have for today. We will be sending out the replay of the webinar. So if you'd like to watch the content again, watch the video again, share it with somebody, or know somebody who hasn't seen it, the replay will be coming out very soon your way. And for any questions that we weren't able to get to today, we're going to try to put together some follow-up content to be able to answer those in the coming weeks and days. Of course, if we can do anything to serve you and your church, we would love to do that. You can reach out to us at theunstuckgroup.com. We hope you have a great rest of your day today, and we'll see you back here on a future webinar.